ॐ नमः श्रीयतिराजाय विवेकानन्दसूरये सच्चित्सुखस्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. As you just heard, today is September 11th, and it is the anniversary of Swami Vivekananda's landmark historic speech at the World Parliament of Religions, where he represented Hinduism. And afterwards, as you heard, that he came to New York and he established this Vedanta Society where I am right now in 1894. The subject this morning is the contemporary relevance of Swami Vivekananda's message. Now, I am in New York, and this is September 11th. Swami Vivekananda's message of the harmony of religions and the dangers of religious fanaticism are most relevant here. I have been here only for 4 years now, but for those who have been here for longer than 20 years, everybody remembers that day on September 11th, 2001, here when it was subject to a terrible attack fueled by religious fanaticism. So the relevance of Swami Vivekananda's message continues. It is something that we must deliberate upon. I shall speak about 3 points of Swami Vivekananda's message, how it is relevant today. The first two are relevant to not only India, but the world at large. And the last point will be relevant specifically to India. I will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we will throw it open for question answers so that I would really like to interact with the distinguished gathering here. One of the advantages of the COVID world is that though we cannot meet in person, but it enables us to meet across the world. This has become more common now, these online uh, webinars or meetings. The first thing that Swami Vivekananda talked about in his historic first address at the World Parliament of Religions on 11th September in Chicago at the Art Institute is the harmony of religions, is religious tolerance, is the harmony of religions. By the way, if you go to the Art Institute today, it's one of the major art galleries, museums in the world. It's in Chicago. And when you enter, the road in front of the museum is called Swami Vivekananda Way. And when you go into the museum, on the left, there is a hall which is usually locked. So if you go and ask, I want to see that hall, they will open the locks for you and you can go inside. It's the hall, the stage where Swami Vivekananda spoke. So it still has been made. It has been partitioned, of course. It's much smaller than what it was originally. And there is a plaque there that here on 11th September 1893, Swami Vivekananda from India addressed the gathered audience in the World Parliament of Religions. Swami Vivekananda talks about at the very beginning how India has sheltered um, the refugees from persecution. He mentions the Zoroastrians, and then, but before that, he mentions he says we sheltered the purest remnants of the Israelites, the Jews who came here upon the destruction of their temple by Roman tyranny. These are his words. I remember about 3 years ago at the Indian consulate in New York, there was a program organized by the Jews in New York, the Indian Jewish community in New York, and it was a Hanukkah celebration, a Hanukkah and Diwali together. So I was asked to speak among many others. Uh, I remember that the Israeli consul general, he spoke here at that function, and he said that I have met Jews from the Jewish diaspora from many different countries of the world, and everywhere they have had, sad tales of persecution, historic persecution in almost just about every different country in the world, except one community, that is the Indian Jewish community. He said that's the one community which said that we have faced no problem at all throughout our long history in India. Have faced no persecution at all. And Swami Vivekananda actually mentioned that in his 11th September address. Unfortunately, later on, I found out that was not entirely true. There has been actually persecution of Jews in India, not by Indians. In Goa, when the Portuguese established their rule there, they also established the Inquisition, and Jews and Hindus and Muslims were all targeted and unfortunately persecuted for some time there. But anyway, from the Indian perspective, we have always welcomed different religions um, till today. Then afterwards, the Zoroastrians came, the Parsis in India today, um, who were fleeing from persecution in Iran at that time, down to the Tibetan Buddhist refugees who are in India today, who have flourished in India. I think Swami Vivekananda would have been very proud of the way that India has sheltered the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan community, and how beautifully they have flourished. Here in the United States, probably the most popular form of Buddhism is Tibetan Buddhism right now. So the first thing that I shall talk about today is this harmony of religions. Swami Vivekananda's concept of the harmony of religions and how it is relevant today. Of course, here he follows his master, Sri Ramakrishna. So all of those teachings which he got from Sri Ramakrishna, they were channeled through Vivekananda and further developed and disseminated all over the world. Before I go into that, before I forget, recently I met this young Vietnamese researcher who was doing his PhD in work in the social dimensions of work, and he said, "I want to meet you." I talked with him just last year in Boston, and his insight is very interesting. He said, when I was studying the developments in the theory of work in the United States, I started finding that behind every positive movement in the United States regarding management theories and work, he says it is all traced back to one man, Swami Vivekananda. He had no idea about who Swami Vivekananda is, but when he began to trace back these ideas, the idea of attaining fulfillment through work, the connection between spirituality and work, servant leadership, all these ideas he found coming through different sources, but they are all traced back. Where did they come in American life and American thought? They came from Swami Vivekananda. So that has now become Swami Vivekananda has now become the focus of the research of this young Vietnamese researcher. So I hope he does come up with some publications in time. Now, this whole subject of the harmony of religions. How can there be harmony between the world religions? That is something that Swami Vivekananda talks about. First of all, Sri Ramakrishna, he taught, and Swami Vivekananda said the same thing, that the ultimate reality is one and infinite. It is one reality, but it has an infinite nature, and so it can be expressed in many different ways. There is no limiting the ultimate reality. In Bengali, used to say, Bhagwaner iti kara jai na. There's no full stop you can give to that ultimate reality. And a beautiful little story he would tell, Sri Ramakrishna, about the ant who went to a mountain of sugar and dragged one bit of sugar back and looked back at the mountain of sugar and said, I will come back and take the whole mountain of sugar later. Of course, it's impossible for the little ant to take the entire mountain of sugar. Just like that, all of us, when we search for God, when we search for that ultimate reality, we do find it. It is not unknowable. It can be realized, that ultimate reality. But we all get one aspect of it, one tiny aspect of it. Nobody exhausts the no religion, no philosophy, no theology, no prophet or teacher can exhaust the infinite nature of that ultimate reality. Now, that ultimate reality, when it is expressed in language, when we try to express it in language, first of all, it cannot be expressed in language. Again, Sri Ramakrishna used to say that Brahman, the ultimate reality, is the only thing that has not been defiled by the tongue. In Hindi or in Indian languages or Sanskrit also, we have a word uchishta. Uchishta means, in Hindi we say jhuta ho gaya, or Bengali etho. So this Brahman, the ultimate reality, is the only thing that has not been expressed in language because it is beyond conceptions, beyond words. When you try to express something that is beyond words, beyond language, then um, you can express it in different ways. The ancient Vedic doctrine of Ekam Sad Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. The ultimate reality is one, but the wise speak of it in different ways. Sri Ramakrishna gave a very homely example. He says there is a lake, and Hindus and Muslims and Christians, they all go to that lake. The water, so Hindus call it jal, and Muslims call it pani, and the Englishmen, the Christians call it water. But they are all referring to that same reality. So, this is a fundamental insight into the nature of religion, that we are trying to grasp something that is infinite. So, you grasp different aspects of that infinite. All of them are true. You're trying to express that something that is fundamentally inexpressible in language. And therefore, when you do express it, you express it differently. And yet, that does not mean you're talking about different things. You're talking about the same thing. Yet, the expression is different. The conceptions are different. The second point which Swami Vivekananda made was that the question is, what are these religions for? What is the purpose of any kind of religion? So he said the purpose of religion and purpose of human life are the same thing. The purpose of life is the manifestation of the divinity already within us. It's a quote which is very popular from Swami Vivekananda. The goal of human life is to manifest the divinity already within us. And the purpose of religion is exactly the same thing. The purpose is uh, to join the human to the divine, to enable us to realize the divinity within and to express it in our lives. So that is the central goal of religion. One might think, so what? But it's an important point. Many people, including people in religion, are not very clear what religion is all about. So Swami Vivekananda was very clear. It is to find God. It is to find realization, spiritual realization, enlightenment, whatever else you call it. Or as Sri Ramakrishna would put it, if you have come to the mango orchard, eat mangoes and be satisfied. Don't spend your time counting leaves and branches, counting the trees. Often you find that the political aspect of religion, the social aspect of religion, that becomes overwhelmingly important. I'm not denying that religion has a social aspect, has a political aspect, or other aspects, but those are secondary. This is something that we must learn from the teachings of Swami Vivekananda or Sri Ramakrishna. Uh, Last year at the Harvard Divinity School, for example, I was noticing the trend in religious studies that what is the relevance of religion to ecology? What is the relevance of religion to global warming? Relevance of religion to gender studies and LGBTQ rights and so on. All of these are good. These religion must have some enlightened views on all of these areas, but they are not the central purpose of religion. In India, it's very clear. Purpose of life is moksha or God realization, but it's not at all so clear here. In many occasions, I had the opportunity to express these views and say that, see, ultimately, all religions are meant for enlightenment. And all your social work, all your political aspects, they are important and they are peripheral, but not central. So the purpose of religion is God realization. The purpose of religion is enlightenment. That is the second point that has to be kept in mind. If the purpose of religion is enlightenment, then all these different religions, they become different pathways, different ways to reach that enlightenment. The different religions are different paths, like different paths leading up a mountaintop. You cannot say one path is right and the other one is wrong. So, this view of religion as different ways to reach God, the Bengali saying by Sri Ramakrishna, Jato mat tato path, as many faiths, so many paths to God realization. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna did not only just say it, it was not a theological conclusion, but he actually practiced it and he saw it to be real in his own spiritual life. He gave a very nice example. If you want to go to uh, the roof of a house, you can climb up through the stone stairs, you can climb up through the wooden stairs, you can even put a bamboo ladder and climb up through that bamboo ladder, or even climb up through a rope, but all of them will get you to the roof of the house. In the same way, the religions of the world, they are different paths. Each has its unique nature, but it all works. They're all valid in what sense? That they work. That if somebody sincerely follows them, you reach realization or enlightenment. That was the important conclusion. From this follows another important insight, that yes, there are many paths, and now we are saying that they are all true. So should we follow all of them? Here, Swami Vivekananda brings in the ancient Indian idea of Ishtanishta. Ishta means your chosen ideal. So if you are pursuing God realization or enlightenment, you need to concentrate, you need to focus, we need to focus our energies. The parable of digging a well, somebody starts digging for water in a particular place, finds it difficult, then goes to another place and starts digging, finds that difficult, and goes to a third place. At the end of the day, there is no water. But if that person had kept on digging in one place, would have found water. Again, a parable from Sri Ramakrishna. So the idea of Ishtanishta is, yes, there are many paths. There are, and all the paths are true. But that does not mean you'll have to follow all the paths. I remember meeting this well-intentioned, interesting gentleman in Belur Mutt many years ago. So he was saying he practices the harmony of religions. How? So on Monday he worships Shiva, on Tuesday he worships the Divine Mother, on Wednesday, on Sunday he's a Christian, on Friday he's a Muslim, on Saturday he's Jewish, on Monday he is practicing the Sikh religion. No, 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 not in that way. So that way one does not make much progress in spiritual life. You practice your tradition. You practice one path sincerely, and that will lead you to enlightenment. So that's a point that Swami Vivekananda also made here, the importance of Ishtanishta. The um, the final point that has to be made is that though we have dedication to one ideal, so if I'm a Krishna Bhakta, I follow the path, the Vaishnava path. If I'm a Shiva Bhakta, I follow the Shaiva path or the path of Advaita Vedanta, whatever. Now, the one more important conclusion in Swami Vivekananda's teachings about the harmony of religions is, though we follow our own path, we have respect, we have love for all paths. One thing Sri Ramakrishna hated above all, disliked above all, was dogmatism. In Bengali, he used to call it Matuar Buddhi, that my path alone is right and everything else is wrong. He said, though it's only people who are not seriously interested in spirituality who fight in the name of religion, keep trying to say my path is right and others are wrong. We rather accept all paths as true while following our own convictions, our own spiritual ideal. Um, this may not seem to be such a great thing in India. It is very natural to us because of the enormous diversity within uh, Hinduism, when we come into contact with other religions, if it's whether it's Christianity or Islam or Judaism, any of the other religions, we immediately feel that yes, this is one more path. We have so many different approaches to religion within Hinduism, and we can also worship God as the Christians do or as the Muslims do. It can be, this is also one more path. It's very natural to us. It is not so here. I was surprised to discover the very exclusive nature of religion in the West. In this very liberal, very advanced society, um, people still have this very exclusive idea of religion. My church, my approach alone is right, and therefore everything else must be wrong. This idea that all religions can be true in some way, this is new. It is an ancient idea in India. It made for religious harmony in India for centuries altogether, millennia altogether. Imagine a culture in which there was such tremendous religious activity, so many competing views, and yet no religious violence. For centuries and millennia, until the coming of the Muslim invasions, there was no religious violence at all in India, almost no religious violence at all in India. Um, the idea was that there are many different approaches to religion, and they can all be valid. We'll discuss this more later, and I'm sure you'll have questions which we can talk about. So this is Swami Vivekananda's uh, basic theory, the theoretical framework for the harmony of religions. Little more has to be added here. Swami Vivekananda's idea of universal religion. So he talks about Vedanta as the universal religion. Um, Now, I was surprised to learn, I didn't know this when I was in India. I was surprised to learn that there is this academic classification and some sort of accepted classification in the West that there are some universal religions and there are some ethnic religions. So, Judaism, for example, is an ethnic religion limited to Jews. Hinduism is classified as an ethnic religion because it's limited to India or to the caste system and among the Hindus themselves. Whereas religions like Christianity or Islam or Buddhism, Buddhism is the first universal religion. Christianity and Islam are universal religions in what sense? So the idea is that anybody can become a Christian or a Muslim or Buddhist, and therefore it is universal. Now, obviously, that is not true. Um, these religions are extraordinarily exclusive in the sense that, yes, you can become a Christian or a Muslim very easily. If you subscribe to these doctrines, you immediately become. But everybody else is excluded. So there are very strong exclusionary principles of, though if you do not belong to this particular religion, then you are outside this, the pale of, you are condemned to maybe burn in hell or whatever. So this is not really the meaning of universal. Whereas Swami Vivekananda, he gave the concept of a true universal religion. In fact, the Christian or Islamic idea of universalism has led to enormous violence over centuries of human history. Whereas Swami Vivekananda gave a truer concept of universal religion um, in multiple ways. One way was he said Vedanta, he understood Vedanta as the core principles found in every religion. If every religion is true, if every religion is a path leading to that ultimate realization, then these core ideas must be there in every religion. And so he says some certain basic ideas, Vedantic ideas, are found at the core of every religion, and that is there throughout human history in every human culture, and that forms the universal religion. He also said that it's the only religion that is acceptable to modern man on grounds of rationality. Another way in which he thought of universal religion was not as one religion which will become universal. He says that can never be. That can never be, and that dream has led to enormous violence, um, religiously inspired violence, including September 11 kind of violence here in New York. Whereas his idea, Swami Vivekananda's idea of universal religion was that it already exists. All the different religions of the world are parts of this universal religion. Think of it as a garden. Instead of trying to say that only one kind of flower is a flower and everything else is to be rejected, or trying to make a bouquet, choosing flowers from different plants and make a bouquet of it. A bouquet is beautiful, but it's also dead. Uh, but whereas the garden is living. He says the universal religion is already there. Look at the religions of the world. They are all parts of this universal religion. That's another way in which he thought about universal religion. So that is one thing that should be added, that Swami Vivekananda's conception of universal religion and Vedanta as that universal religion. Isn't it parochial to use the word Vedanta? If you have any objection, then don't use the word Vedanta, as long as the principles that there is an ultimate reality. The purpose is to realize that reality. Different religions are paths to realizing that reality. If you accept those, you can call it whatever you like. This is the core of the universal religion which he talked about. So that's the first point I wanted to make. I want to move on to the second point today. We're very different. Swami Vivekananda's relevance, contemporary relevance. Um, Swami Vivekananda's relevance to modern thought, I would say. Um, I will limit myself to one aspect, to modern consciousness studies, and Swami Vivekananda's presentation of the Vedantic idea of consciousness, Vedantic theory of consciousness as our real self. So I'm making a big shift now. in modern consciousness studies has become a very big thing now. It's the core of our being that we are conscious beings. And so, what is this consciousness? This is the focus of study right now. It's a hot subject now. Um, Vedanta and other Indic traditions, Buddhism, Jainism, we have very profound theories of consciousness, very deep theories of consciousness. So I was reading this book recently by a professor from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Evan Thompson. The name of the book is Sleeping, Waking, Waking, Dreaming Being, which is taken from the Mandukya Upanishad idea of the three states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. So Evan Thompson there says consciousness studies is not a new area of study. Thousands of years ago, the sages of the Upanishads made the first profound breakthroughs in our understanding of consciousness. And he quotes William Thompson approvingly, saying that the great paradigm shift that occurred thousands of years ago in the Upanishads, it's so profound, so important for human civilization, that if we were not ethnically biased, we would not date our history. We should not date our history as BC and AD, before Christ, or AD and after Dominus. So we should date our history as before Upanishad and after Upanishad. World history should be before Upanishad and after Upanishad. Such a profound, huge claim that Evan Thompson makes there. So, what is this idea of consciousness that we have now, and what can Vedanta do? What is Swami Vivekananda's relevance to this present debate? At present, the debate centers around what is called the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness, if you Google it, there's an enormous amount of material on the hard problem of consciousness. This term, the hard problem, was coined by David Chalmers, who is an Australian philosopher. Right now, he's here in New York. He's the head of the Mind-Brain Consciousness Unit of the New York University. What is his basic conception? His idea is that this consciousness which we all experience, subjective feeling, the first person experience of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, of thinking, of loving, hating, understanding, remembering, forgetting, our entire inner life, which we all have at this time. Right now, it's there. That's the core of our being. And yet, we cannot see, we cannot understand how a physical system like a brain could generate that. You see, when you do consciousness studies by studying the brain, what you get is more information about the brain. The more you study the brain, the more you understand the brain. But where is the jump between brain and consciousness? Where does the mind come in? Where do our conscious experiences come in? How the more you investigate the brain with more sophisticated instruments, you will get at the most tiny movements of electricity in our neurons. That's the last thing that you can get by physical investigation. And yet, when we experience the world, we don't experience bursts of electricity in the brain. We experience color and sound and smell and taste and touch. We think, we understand, we love or hate or desire, and we even seek for enlightenment. All of these are very vivid, first person, subjective experiences, which we call mind or consciousness. How is it related to the brain? This he calls the hard problem of consciousness, in contrast to the so-called easy problems. Easy and not easy in that sense. By easy problems, David Chalmers means the most of consciousness studies now is basically correlation studies. You have some experience, and the neuroscientist studies, does an fMRI scan of the brain and says, so when you are drinking coffee, this is the neuron that is firing in your brain, and that is responsible for giving you the taste of coffee or the flavor of coffee or whatever. So it's basically a science of correlations. You report something, and the scientist will find something corresponding in the brain, which is some neurons or some area which becomes active. But how those neurons produce consciousness, how something objective produces something subjective, that is a mystery. And if you look at the internet, if you look at the literature available, Every now and then, there will be an article on the internet now or in science journals. The mystery of consciousness explained. So I always say it is explained away. At some point, you will find something physical is introduced and says that is consciousness. Well, it is not. There was a very nice cartoon which showed um, a science student, maybe a researcher, explaining his theory on a blackboard with mathematical symbols, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. So all the steps are full of mathematical symbols. Only step 4 says in big letters, a miracle, a miracle. And then again, step 5 shows a lot of mathematical symbols. And that in the cartoon, the professor or the guide of that student is saying, I think you need to work on step 4. So modern consciousness studies is like that. On one hand, enormous information and investigation into the activities of the brain and the nervous system. And on the other hand, the psychology of the mind and consciousness, the phenomenology which we experience internally. In between is that step 4, a miracle. How, they say, how is the biblical reference of water being transformed into wine in a miracle? How is it done? The scientist says that we understand wine, we understand water, but how it became water became wine, it's a miracle. How we understand the brain, we understand internally, at least we understand what is consciousness. How does this brain become consciousness? We don't understand. Another philosopher here, Galen Strawson, who is in the University of Texas in Austin, he says that there is really no hard problem of consciousness. We have already assumed materialism, that materialism is true, the body is the ultimate reality, the brain is the ultimate reality. And then we are trying to find out how this brain is producing consciousness. We already assumed that consciousness is a byproduct. But rather, Galen Strawson says, it is not consciousness which is a mystery, because consciousness is directly evident to us. We are all conscious. Have direct experience of our own consciousness. What is the mystery is matter itself. A hard problem is not how matter produces consciousness. Rather, the hard problem is what is matter. Because the more you investigate matter through physics, the more it is disappearing before our very eyes. Recently, I read an article on uh, Schrodinger. How Schrodinger was interested in Vedanta. In fact, I didn't know the details. He used to go around telling all his colleagues about Upanishads and about Brahman and Atman and so on. Heisenberg, we know, was very interested in Vedanta. Swami Vivekananda knew this. More than 100 years ago, he said that the only kind of religion or spirituality acceptable to the modern mind at that time, he said, will be this Vedantic conception of religion. Uh, he met some of the leading minds of his time. Tesla, uh, not the car Tesla, which is very popular. In America, if you say Tesla, people will think it's the Elon Musk car Tesla. But the scientist, Nikola Tesla, used to come in the World Parliament Religions. He would be there. He would stand at the back and listen to Vivekananda's talks. He had a pavilion in the Universal Exposition in Chicago at that time. He would shut down the pavilion and come and listen to Vivekananda's talk during the time of Vivekananda's speeches, and then he would again go away. Later on, there's an interesting correspondence between Tesla and Vivekananda on the ultimate nature of matter and energy and the universe. Um, Vivekananda met William James. William James invited Vivekananda to give a talk at Harvard University in 1896. Um, Later on, Swami Abhedananda, who was here in the Vedanta Society of New York, had a wonderful interaction with Edison. So some of the leading scientists at that time were very attracted to Vedanta. What is Vedanta's contribution to it? Well, I'll start with David Chalmers here at NYU. His solution to the hard problem of consciousness is to take consciousness seriously. It's not to say that consciousness is a byproduct of matter. Rather, consciousness is a fundamental reality. He says we have to accept this seemingly crazy idea that consciousness is a fundamental reality of the universe. And this is panpsychism, that consciousness or mind is a fundamental reality of the universe. It's not a byproduct, not an epiphenomenon. It is present like time, space, matter, energy. Consciousness is also fundamental. I don't know if he knows David Chalmers, but this is nothing new. The ancient sage Kapila, the founder of Sankhya philosophy, said this more than 5,000 years ago in India, that there are two kinds of fundamental realities in the universe: consciousness and this material universe. Material universe, consciousness he called Purusha, and this material universe he called Prakriti. So this Prakriti Purusha dualism, that consciousness is a fundamental reality of this universe. It was known, and it is the fundamental basis of Sankhya philosophy for thousands of years in India. So Swami Vivekananda brought these ideas, and they are becoming more relevant more and more. Talk about this later on uh, when we are in the Q&A session. He brought an idea of religion to the West, which was absolutely new. See, the common idea of religion is belief, is faith. In fact, here in the West, here in the United States, the word used for religion is faith. What is your faith? But we know in India, for example, that there are religions which cannot be so easily described as faith or a belief system. Buddhism is not a faith in that sense. Sankhya or Advaita Vedanta is not really a faith in that sense. But here, because people think in terms of Christianity and at most Judaism or Islam, which are theistic religions. So there is God, and there's you have to believe in God. We have a scripture, we have a prophet or a teacher who tells you this, and you believe, and then you proceed. It's entirely valid. There's nothing wrong with it. But the problem with it in the modern age is it is under tremendous attack. So if you listen to some of the debates of Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, debating numerous Christian theologians or Jewish rabbis, you find that this faith-based religion is unable to stand up to the criticism of modern thought, of scientific skepticism. Swami Vivekananda brought into this country a completely different new idea of religion, which is an ancient idea in India, that religion is experience. He said religion is not believing in something, religion is realization. If there is a God, I must see God. We know this story of how Narendranath Datta became Vivekananda. He goes to Ramakrishna and he goes around asking, have you seen God? And he asks Sri Ramakrishna, have you seen God? And he receives a satisfactory answer for the first time that yes, I have seen God. And in fact, as I see you more clearly than I see you, and you too can see God. And there is a path to experiencing that reality. So experience, just as we take experience as the proof of reality in our day-to-day world, if only I can experience it, I will accept it as real. Even in science, if only an experiential experiment proves it, then I will accept it as real. Similarly, here also, Swami Vivekananda, the first book he translated here in the West, here in the New Vedanta Society of New York, is his famous Raja Yoga, translation of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, where by certain meditative exercises one actually has these experiences, which proves to oneself the reality of religion. So, a religion based on reason, a religion based on experience. This is what Swami Vivekananda brought to the West, and that is still very contemporary, very relevant in this world today. One more point I would like to make, and then we can go into question answers. So I've made these 2 points. First is Swami Vivekananda's teaching of the harmony of religions, which I think is even more relevant in the world today. And the second point I made was Swami Vivekananda's introduction of Vedanta, the Vedantic theory of consciousness, for example, which is now being sort of, I wouldn't say accepted, but investigated. In fact, I should mention to you that David Chalmers himself, in the NYU, he organized a colloquium in the philosophy of mind, the hard problem of consciousness and Advaita Vedanta perspective. So here in NYU, with some of the top philosophers of mind, I attended that conference, and uh, and I found that people there, there's only a small group, 20 people, but the people sitting there were the top philosophers of mind in the world. If you Google them, top philosophers in the world today, living today. I mean, if you to add living, otherwise you'll get Plato and Aristotle. Um, Among them, three or four were sitting right there in that hall. And what was being discussed? Hard problem of consciousness, Advaita Vedanta perspective. So at least it is being considered seriously now. It is being taken up. Certain ideas are emerging in consciousness studies, which have been anticipated in India thousands of years ago by Vedanta, by different Buddhist or Jain traditions. So that's the second point I wanted to make. A rational, experience-based approach to religion um, with a special emphasis on consciousness studies. Third point I would like to make is relevant to India. Swami Vivekananda said that he emphasized confidence, self-confidence. He said, old religion says the one who does not believe in God is an atheist. The new religion says the one who does not believe in himself is an atheist. Uh, this, this idea of confidence in oneself, not only personal, but I would like to emphasize national also. This is something that became very clear to me here in the West. That when I look at us compared to Western civilization, Western thought, I find a great lack of confidence in our own culture, in our own heritage, in our own philosophy. Um, Always looking to Western thought for validation. Somebody was telling me that when first, this National Geographic and Discovery Channel and all, they came to India, they did a survey and they found what kind of programs Indians are interested in. They found that Indians are not interested in learning about other countries. Indians are not interested in learning about their own country, India. Rather, they found Indians are interested in learning about what Westerners think about India. So programs made about India by Westerners, that became very popular. Somehow, always looking to the West for validation. So criticism by some Western academician makes us furious. Praise by some Western academician makes us very happy. Why? Why should it matter at all? To emphasize my point, let me just give a couple of examples, two or three examples. One is, first example of this lack of confidence in ourselves is this book. This is called A Brief History of Thought by a French philosopher, Luc Ferry. Brief History of Thought, Luc Ferry. What is important about this book? I came across it about 2 years ago in a bookshop here. It's an introduction to Western philosophy by a French philosopher. So, now I have been reading these books like this, but all written by British or American authors. When I read this, I was struck by one thing, that he is coming entirely from a French perspective. And the French are very famous for this. They don't care much about the English speaking world at all. But entirely from a French perspective, when you look at the bibliography at the end of this book, you will find recommended reading will be French philosophers and some German philosophers, not one British or American philosopher. It is as if, from his perspective, the English speaking world has made no contribution at all to philosophy. Whereas if you read Bertrand Russell or any Western introduction to Western philosophy, it will be mostly the contributions of British, American philosophers, of course, with the German philosophers also. Now, my point is, this is authentic. He is right to do this. He is coming from a French context. So he first of all sees the world, European thought. This is a guide to European thought, Western philosophy. Western philosophy, European thought, through the lenses, through the understanding, through the paradigm of French culture. Now, what is the advantage in this? I found so many insights in this little book, which I have not found in reading so many books on Western philosophy by English authors. I'll share one insight and then move on to the second example. See, he talks about philosophy. What is the meaning of philosophy? I remember in our days as novices in Belur Mutt, when we were taught Western philosophy by a professor. I remember Professor Nirod Baran Chakravarti, who's a retired professor from Jadavpur University. Wonderful man. He was telling us, first thing he said, that listen, don't confuse our philosophy, darshan, with Western philosophy, philosophy. Philosophy means philosophia, love of wisdom. So it is about thinking. whereas darshan means actually seeing some ultimate, realizing some ultimate truth. So they are two different things. I thought, yes, I suppose so. And that's what I found in different philosophy books also. But when I come to this book, I find he says, philosophy, that's not the real term. Look at the term theory. This author says, theory. It comes, if you go back to the original roots, theos and orao. Orao means seeing. Theos means the ultimate reality or truth or God or whatever it is. Seeing the ultimate realities is theory. That is the real core of Western thought or philosophy. Now I thought it's exactly the same meaning as darshan. What darshan means and theory, now I understand it means the same thing. Now, see, this is a simple insight, but it's a powerful insight. Why is it that nobody in the English speaking world came across it? It has to be a new approach. K.C. Bhattacharya, Professor K.C. Bhattacharya, is an extraordinarily brilliant and profound thinker whom we are rediscovering now in the late 21st century also. He said the sign of a colonized mind, he called it a shadow mind, sign of a colonized mind is the lack of creativity. He gives an example that remember he said this in his lecture Swaraj in Ideas in the 1930s. He said that when an English professor writes an appreciation of Shakespeare, it's of a certain kind. When a French professor across the channel writes an appreciation of Shakespeare, it's different, coming from a different perspective. Now, you would expect that a professor in Calcutta University writing in India across oceans of time and space, a vastly different culture, we would have an entirely new perspective of Shakespeare. But no, look at the books being written by our professors. They are like second rate copies of the Oxford professors. Why? Because it's trying to imitate. Um, I will try to understand Shakespeare just as a professor in Oxford or Cambridge has understood Shakespeare. Why not try to understand Shakespeare as an Indian? Now, the huge problem is, the difficulty there is, we are deprived of our own roots. We are given this Western paradigm, and to understand Western thought from an Indian perspective, we must have an Indian perspective. But we don't. Our education does not provide us with that, does not provide us with a grounding in Indian thought. That brings me to my second example. Second example is from my own experience. Many years ago, I was a student in class 11 and 12, and one of the subjects we had at that time, which was offered, was logic. It was very popular among the students at that time. I don't know if it is still taught. It was very popular among us because we scored high marks. So we took that subject. I also took it, and it was all about Greek logic. You know, so the Greek syllogism, and very interesting. It's only years later when I studied Indian philosophy, when I studied Nyaya, I studied Navya Nyaya, I was stunned. Here we have this enormously sophisticated and ancient system of logic. Why is it not taught to us? Why do I have to go to Aristotelian logic? I mean, it's good to learn Greek logic, but a much more sophisticated system of logic, which is our own system, we don't even know about it. I'm sure the new syllabus must have made changes, but this is what I'm talking about. We have no connection, no grounding in our own thought, in Indian philosophy, in Indian religious thought, in Indian secular thought. We don't have that grounding. So, how can we get a proper perspective? The third example I will give is from my recent experience at Harvard University. I was surprised and little saddened to see that universities are very generally left leaning, and so you expect protests against Trump and all of that. So that was there. I saw that, but I saw a number of protests against India and the government of India by Indian students, led by Indian students at Harvard. Now, it was a little surprising for me because whatever your convictions, maybe there's something that you're against CA and RC, whatever it is you're against, you're protesting there. But I never saw students of any other country protesting or criticizing their country. There are many more Chinese students at Harvard than there are Indian students. Obviously, not a single protest against anything in China by these students, and there are some reasons for that. That's not always a nice reason. It's good that you have freedom, One might say we must be proud that you have freedom of expression. Our students are protesting against our own country or own government there. But does it come from freedom of expression or does it come from elsewhere? I spoke to some of the students. Why are you doing this? Like, what is exactly the purpose? One thing I noticed was one thing they have all have in common is a complete lack of grounding in our own culture, a complete lack of any kind of sense of pride, grounding, knowledge, ignorant. Um, so I can talk more about this later on. It is very easy to criticize my religion, my country, my culture if I have no idea of that religion, culture, or country. And if I go to this new place, I'm at Harvard University, I'm a young person, and I want to fit in. So whatever is cool, what the American cool, whatever is fashionable, I'll do that, and in order to feel validated and in order to feel accepted by others. That was a little strange, and but it's not the fault of the younger generation. It's not the fault of the students themselves. They do not have that grounding. It's only when I've got something from Hinduism or Buddhism or Jainism, then I will feel like defending it or feel like taking a proper balanced perspective. When I've not got anything at all, I don't know anything. It's very easy to criticize. It's very easy to malign, especially if I get some kind of acceptance from others. So these are three examples I gave, which show the lack of confidence in ourselves and in our own culture. Swami Vivekananda said, forget belief in God, belief in yourself, and which means belief in your own culture, in your own uh, know something. My point was know something, and then you are free to criticize. That's wonderful. You can, if you are well grounded in Indian thought, and then you have valid criticisms of Indian thought. Wonderful, nothing like it. That's how progress is made. But without knowing anything, just for the sake of being accepted by your friends, um, that I found very. I mean, it's a little saddening. I remember one lady at the Harvard Divinity School, a staff member, who took me out to lunch and was asking me, so why are there so few Hindus at the Harvard Divinity? Are there no Hindus in Harvard at Harvard? I said there are. There are plenty of Hindus at business school, in medical school, in science faculties doing very well. But none of them seem to want to study religion. None of them want to study Hinduism. So in all the Hinduism courses, I found mostly white, African American, Asian people. So this is a symptom of the lack of interest, lack of knowledge in our own culture. What it means, why is it so bad? Maybe we can discuss this. I've already run out of time, but I've made the points. So the 3 points I made was the contemporary relevance of Swami Vivekananda. I chose 3 areas. One is the harmony of religions. Two, it is a rational modern concept of religion with special emphasis on consciousness studies, Vedanta. The third one is the importance of self-confidence being rooted or grounded in Indian culture for Indians. Thank you very much. We can interact now. Definition of enlightenment. Technically, if you go to the religions of the world, and even in Indian thought, um, each will have a different definition of enlightenment. For example, let me give the definition from a Vedantic Advaita Vedanta perspective. The central teaching of Advaita Vedanta is Tattvamasi, that thou art. It is an ultimate reality of this universe, and that is actually we ourselves. So enlightenment would be to realize that I am Brahman, that infinite existence consciousness place. That's my nature. Right now I think I am this body-mind complex. But Vedanta claims that you are already Brahman. We just don't know it. This not knowingness is called ignorance. And the knowledge which comes, which shows us that I am Brahman, when Shankaracharya sings Chidananda Rupa Shivoham, that is enlightenment, according to Vedanta. Now, if you ask a Buddhist, is that enlightenment? No. According to Buddhist, Bodhi is enlightenment, realization of the emptiness nature of the world and of the self. So the Buddhist will say there is no such thing as a permanent self. There is no such thing as God. And the realization of the emptiness of the world, shunyata of the world and the shunyata of the individual self, that constitutes bodhi, because that is what liberates you from suffering. It liberates you from suffering. Liberation from suffering is the goal which was set out by the Buddha. Bodhi leads to nirvana, that is enlightenment. Now, are they the same? The thing is, experientially, you may have different experiences, but me. Yes. So the blind people touching the elephant and say one person says the elephant is like a pillar, one person says elephant is like a rope, one person says elephant is like a pipe. Of course, somebody's touching the leg of the elephant, tail of the elephant, trunk of the elephant, but they are all touching the elephant. Now, enlightenment is like that. If the ultimate reality is infinite, when you realize it, you may realize it in different aspects. That was the incredible breakthrough of Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda. And of course, it's not a new idea in India. I think it's only from Hinduism that somebody like Sri Ramakrishna or Vivekananda could come. So, yes, technically, the definitions of enlightenment will differ from religion to religion, even within Indian thought, from one darshana to another darshana. But that's only because all of these religions, all of these darshanas are approaching the same reality in different ways. Since you approach in different ways, your expression of it, your understanding of it, your definition of it will also change. But look, will all of them work? Will all of them take you beyond suffering? Yes. Will all of them bring you into contact with realization of the ultimate reality of this universe? Yes. Only your language may be different. The Dvaitavadi may say, I have realized Narayana, I am in the presence of Narayana. Or the Advaitavadi may say, I realize I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi. The Vaishnava might say, I am going to Vaikuntha in the presence of Krishna. But they sound wildly different. But if you come close, you will see they are different in language, in cultural context, in the conceptions, but they are all, there's a word soteriological, which is transformative, liberating. I'll give you one little example and then we'll go on to the next question. So at Harvard, I took up multiple courses on Buddhism to study Buddhism also. So one very famous professor, Garfield, who's an expert on Indo-Tibetan Buddhism. So he had a course on Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, and I took that. And so when I entered, of course, the Professor Garfield knows that I am a Vedantic Swami. I'm a Hindu monk. So he said, keep your Vedanta outside the door. Swami, when you come in here, keep your Vedanta outside the door. Don't mix it up with Tibetan Buddhism. We studied it. And one day I was walking in the street outside the university in Boston, just outside Harvard. And I met this Tibetan Lama. And he asked me, what are you doing here? I said, I'm studying your philosophy at Harvard. He was very interested. What are the books you're studying? Which philosophers are you studying? And then he said, you are a follower of Advaita Vedanta. I said, yes. Oh, it is the same thing. Now, see, a Tibetan Lama who is a practitioner, he is telling me your Advaita is the same thing as ours, ultimately, not in expression. Philosophically, there are many differences. He told me that you have these 5 verses on enlightenment. I said, Shankaracharya's Manisha Panchakam. He said, yes, 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 that one. I use it to teach Tibetan Buddhism. Here is a Tibetan Lama using Shankaracharya's Advaitic Manisha Panchakam, 5 verses on realization, to introduce or teach his classes on Tibetan Buddhism. What does it mean? So it means that at an experiential level, there is a unity, a synthesis finally. Okay. There's such a conception? Not really. In mainstream Christianity, Islam, or the Indo-Semitic religions, it's mostly belief, and by belief, by the grace of God, you are liberated. Liberated in the sense salvation. You attain salvation after death. You go to heaven or Jannat or whatever it is. Uh, so enlightenment being an event where you realize, like literally the word enlightenment is related to knowledge. Light comes. So That kind of understanding is not there. But the result is ultimately the same, that you go beyond suffering, you attain a state of fulfillment. So in Semitic religions, it's put in a more theistic bhakti paradigm. So even in India, in Hinduism, if you go to something like Dvaita Vedanta and some of the bhakti traditions, whole idea will be by the grace of Vishnu or Narayana, I'm liberated and I will go to Vaikuntha and stay in the presence, a kind of Sayudhya, Salukya, Mukti. Something like that is found in the Semitic religions. But you're right, this concept of enlightenment, it's a more sophisticated concept you find in systems like Advaita Vedanta or Buddhism or Jainism, yoga. In fact, what I was talking about, and Swami Vivekananda was talking about, the harmony of religions. Sadbhav, even more than Sadbhav, Sadbhav is goodwill, but even more than Sadbhav is harmony, that all religions are ultimately true, leading to the same reality, and they can coexist. Not just tolerance, Sahishnuta is tolerance. Implicit in the ideal of tolerance is intolerance. Implicit in the idea of tolerance is violence. You are wrong. I am just tolerating you. I'm just letting you be for certain reasons. This idea this is harmony of religion is much higher than this. The Indian ideal is much higher than this. I'm not even saying just Hindu ideal or Vivekananda's ideal. It is, in fact, an Indian ideal. In Ashoka's time, if you find the inscriptions of Ashoka, Buddhist, a Buddhist emperor, who is saying that he Devanam Priyadarshi, if you see the original inscriptions, uh, he looks upon all fates and all the paths with equal favor, and that all should exist. He even says, when recently a philosopher was telling me, in one of the inscriptions it is said that the emperor wants that in every town there should be community of every religion. Beautiful insights. That we should not judge another religion by uses the term pashanda. Pashanda means the brutal people. We should not judge a religion by the brutal people in that religion. By the lowest people, we should not judge a religion. Similarly, we should not celebrate or give any scope to the pashandas in our own religion. So, such an enlightened idea that is far higher than tolerance. Sarva Dharma Sahishnuta is just tolerance. Religious tolerance is actually a pretty low idea. It's just the beginning, a kindergarten, and it can easily slip into intolerance and violence. And so, harmony of religions is a much higher idea, not tolerance, acceptance that your path is true, and beyond that, I can also learn from your path. You can also learn from my path. That's how in India philosophy grew. If you see our extraordinary history of Indian philosophy, did they all say all are correct and so there's no need to quarrel? No, no, no. They all said we are right and you are not right. Whether it's Advaita versus Dvaita or Hinduism versus Buddhism. But the method was not quarreling. The method was not fighting, not murder or genocide. No, the method was intellectual debate. We had a term for it, vada. Vada means debate. I have a position, you have a position. Please state your position. I will state my position, and then we will use logic, a agreed format of logic to debate and work out the issues. And if you look at how it went in the history, actually how it actually what applied, nearly 1,000 years of debate between the Hindu schools and the Buddhist schools. Buddhists denying the existence of immortal soul, denying the existence of God, and Hindus trying to prove the existence of Atman, trying to prove the existence of Ishvara. This tremendous debate for nearly 1,000 years. It was very good. It led to an enormous flowering of Indian thought. And a lot of Buddhist logic, a lot of Buddhist ideas was absorbed into Hinduism. And I'm quite sure from my studies, a lot of Vedantic ideas of the nature of the ultimate reality were also absorbed into Buddhism. So that the final developments of thought, the highest level, I won't say final, highest developments of thought on both sides are very similar. That a Lama meeting a Hindu Swami, Tibetan Buddhist Lama meeting a Hindu Swami on the streets outside Harvard University can say, oh, it is the same thing. So, yes.
Maharaj, you referred to students studying Hinduism in Harvard Divinity School. Now, I'm saying, like, my experience tells me that this is a more complex phenomenon. Will Harvard Divinity School ever fund a project which is on Hinduism from a different perspective? That is also a big question. I mean, if we really go through the themes and the topics they have funded for several years and the kind of arguments that have been made there, so ultimately, funding is also a very important question. If somebody wants to present the Indian perspective, will that person receive a funding from a university abroad?
Yes, I was there and I was funded. So that's
This is a
encouraging.
very recent, I know
Very
this,
recent
but
phenomenon.
this is a very recent phenomenon. I mean,
Yes. So very recent phenomenon. And it's not really the fault of Harvard University. What I realized was is also a big question of money, as you said, funding. It's only because of some enlightened view of the Nagrals, who are a business family from Mumbai, and Professor Clooney, who is in the South Asian Studies department, and he is a professor of Hinduism at Harvard University. They decided to not only have academicians, but actually to get practitioners. There are Buddhist monks at Harvard every year. Why are there no Hindu monks? So why not do that? That was the idea. And Harvard has no resistance to that. They are open to it. And that's how this program started. And I hope each year there'll be more and more practicing Hindu monastics at Harvard, just like there are Buddhist monks. In my batch, I was there. Shweta Chaitanya ji, who is a nun from the Chinmay mission, she was there. And Sadhak Akshar from the Swaminarayan Sampradaya was there. And right now, it has been suspended because of the COVID situation, but we hope next year again the program will start. So funding is a problem, but there is no real obstruction to it. If we fund it, Harvard is willing. But the presence is important. Presence is important. You must be there and make your voice heard. I noticed one thing. I'm sorry to say this, but I noticed one thing. I saw presence of Hindu students in all parts of Harvard doing very well. Maybe next to the Chinese, they are the largest international contingent at Harvard or all the Ivy League universities here, except Divinity School. Divinity School, there of course it's majority Christian mostly, but there are Jews studying Judaism. There's a strong Islamic studies department, and I saw Muslim students from all over the world, including Pakistan, who are there and they are very happy that we are studying Islam at Harvard University. I would listen to their conversations, excitedly discussing this point of Islam or that point of Islam. What about the Hindu students? None, none. Um, the one or two maybe were there, and that is also there. I remember the Bhagavad Gita class. It was so mortifying. I was there, and other monks were there, and the whole class was mostly white, few African American, few Asian students, international students. Only a couple of Hindu students who came, and they came to criticize the Bhagavad Gita. One of them said, "Isn't it a casteist text?" And the one said, "Isn't it against women?" Now, two problems. One is you know nothing about the Gita, struggling to pronounce a single Sanskrit word. Indian. You come to study the Bhagavad Gita in the Gita class at Harvard. There are others are much more knowledgeable who are not Indians. And you come with this point of criticizing the Gita, and the criticism does not come from a genuine place. Is it coming from genuine sympathy for the condition of women, genuine sympathy with the condition of caste problems and all? No, it is just because it's the thing to do. It is a cool and acceptable thing to do. So they don't realize how silly and peculiar it makes them look in the eyes of everybody else.
how do you find Heidegger's concept of being in the world? What will you say on this approach from the view of Vedanta?
All right, that's a difficult question. In fact, a book has been written about it. I will not go into it because I'm not an expert on Heidegger, but it's a promising area of his Dasein and the idea of being in the world with the Vedantic concept of Sat. It's a book written by John Grimes, I think. Let me show you that book. So this is the book, Shankara and Heidegger, Being, Truth and Freedom by John Grimes. His works on Vedanta are very authentic. He has other books on Vedanta, very authentic work. So, and he's well traditionally learned learned Advaita Vedanta. So this is a good approach. Why I'm reluctant to comment either this way or that way is when you start off, it seems very promising because Heidegger says that the fundamental question is not about why this thing exists or that thing exists. The fundamental question in ontology is not why one type of thing exists or another type of thing exists, but why is there any existence at all? Why does anything exist? What is existence? And he says this is a fundamental question which has been ignored in Western philosophy till he says, I am going to talk about it. Now, that seems very much like an investigation into the nature of existence, which leads straight back to Advaita Vedanta, back to the Upanishads. Chandogya Upanishad is about Sat, about being. But having said that, when you actually enter into Heidegger, he seems to take it in an interesting but different direction. This idea of being thrown into the world, into existence, existence being in the world. It's not exactly what the jiva is. What is the relationship between being in the world and the Vedantic concept of jiva? It becomes complicated. But yes, it's very promising. It's very promising. So I'll leave it at that. Well, first of all, is it happening? Certainly. It is certainly happening over the last, I think, starting from Vivekananda through many great thinkers, leaders whom we have had pre-independence, down till today. I think it's a positive movement. It will be a long process of decolonization because this is it grasped our minds so deeply. K.C. Bhattacharya in that lecture, Swaraj and Ideas, he says it will be. This was before the independence of India. He says it will be clearly that one day the colonizer will go away. The colonizing power, Britain, will leave these shores of India, but it will remain in our minds. He says that in his lecture Swaraj and Ideas. But this process has started, and especially right now, I think the movement is very positive, is all in the right direction. Yes, there will be some failures, some setback, both not just the government, but as communities also. We must emphasize our own culture and religion. I see more of that happening in the US. Um, there is this Vivekananda Vidyapeeth, I know in New Jersey, where Indians, two Indian retired professors, um, Dr. Jani and his wife, they have gathered together nearly 800 children of immigrants, first generation. So the kids who are born here, and they teach them about Vivekananda's teachings and see a very positive and broad and open idea about Indian culture. So, our problem is we come from different sects, different groups. So in the West, I keep getting this complaint from, say, the managers of Hindu temples and all. So somebody will say the problem with running a Hindu temple is somebody will say, "Humko, we want Ganpati." Somebody will say, "We want Shiva." Somebody, the Bengalis will come and say, "We want Durga." Now, what do I do? How many can I accommodate? So in this Vivekananda Vidyapeeth, for example, what they have done is they have said all of it will be there, but we will base it on the teachings of Swami Vivekananda. That is central. And we will have Saraswati Puja and Shivaratri and all of that. All are welcome. But it has to be a very broad, very deep and open form of Hinduism as taught by Swami Vivekananda. I see a lot of that going on in the Indian community here in America, I'm sure in the diaspora across the world, and we need to have more of that. I see how much is being invested by the Muslim community in transmitting Islam to the next generation. By the Sikhs, Sikhs are doing a wonderful job in the West of transmitting Sikhism to the next generation, Sikh culture and religion. I see how much effort is being always being put by the Jewish community, tremendous effort and investment into transmitting Judaism to the next generation. Very advanced thinking, Jewish people who say we don't believe in religion. We don't even believe in the teachings of Judaism, but they proudly say we are Jewish. We are cultural Jewish. We hold on to Jewish culture, even if we don't believe in religion. So at least that much should be there, that we are rooted in Indian question. By the way, I was seeing on the website of the Vivekananda International Foundation an initiative to teach Indian philosophy. So lectures and talks on Indian philosophy for beginners, I saw that. And that's a really welcome initiative. All such think tanks and organizations should do more about this. Um, Aurobindo and Advaita Vedanta. We know that Sri Aurobindo was deeply influenced by Vivekananda, and influenced by Vedanta also. His essays on the Gita, especially his major work is repetitive, iterative work on the Isha Upanishad. There's multiple commentaries which he has written on the Isha Upanishad. So definitely his thought is deeply interpenetrated by, inspired by, and even founded upon Vedanta. But his relation to Advaita Vedanta is a little problematic because he sees Shankara as this world denying philosopher. Brahman only is real, the world is an illusion. And integral Vedanta takes a much more realistic approach, including the descent of the divine into this manifested world. I'm sure he sees himself as an advance on Shankara Vedanta. In his writings also that comes out as clear. It's not that he's refuting Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, but he sees himself as taking it one step forward in his integral Vedanta, in his integral religion. I am not so sure that is the correct approach to take. In my discussions with and readings of the teachings of the Shankara Advaita Vedantins of today, the monks in Uttarkashi, in the Himalayas, Uttarakhand, they are what Aurobindo sees as Advaita Vedanta is actually a pale imitation of the real thing. Unfortunately, the teachings of such monks are mostly in Hindi. They have not been translated into Hindi, into English. Very profound. Some of the essential discussions, key discussions going on in Western philosophy here, they would throw a lot of light if they would just listen to these uh, the teachers who are teaching ordinary people in the in Uttarkashi, in the Himalayas. These monks talk about nature of consciousness, the nature of this world, very deep. It's not as simple as saying that the world is an illusion and dismissing it. So Aurobindo, I think, is doing Shankara a little bit of an injustice there, of these monks in the Himalayas. So one Swami, Akhandananda Saraswati, his books are only in Hindi. He's a prodigious scholar in the middle of the 20th century. So one simple insight from him, a tremendous insight. He says, what is the relationship between consciousness and matter, Jad or Chetan? He gives multiple approaches. In these approaches, he just sums up the entire scope of Indian philosophy. One approach is consciousness has emerged from matter. Jad se Chetan hua hai. Who says that? The materialists. Starting with the Charvakas down to our modern reductionist materialists, that consciousness emerges from the brain and nervous system. That is one approach. Second approach, matter emerges from consciousness. Chetan se Jad aaya. Who says that? All the theistic religions which say God has created this universe, philosophically speaking, what are you claiming? You are claiming that this universe of time, space, matter, energy has come from consciousness. Because God is basically in every religion, God has to be conscious. Nobody talks about an unconscious God. So from consciousness alone, this universe is produced. Third approach is neither is produced from the other. Both are fundamental realities and they continue in parallel existence. Who says this? Kapila, Sankhya philosophy, Patanjali's yoga philosophy. And today, whether they accept it or not, David Chalmers here in New York and his panpsychism idea of consciousness as a fundamental reality of the universe, basically in principle exactly the same thing, what Kapila and Patanjali have said thousands of years ago. By the way, I had a discussion with Deepak Chopra, and you can find it online. There was a dialogue on Vedanta. Before that, he said, Swamiji, these people are stealing our ideas and not giving us credit. I said, let them talk about it, because if they say that I have borrowed these ideas from Vedanta or from Buddhism, then they will not be taken seriously by other Westerners. So even David Chalmers says, I'm completely,